In the summer of 1943, the skies over occupied Europe witnessed the arrival of a fighter plane so massive that German pilots initially scoffed at its ungainly profile. As the enormous Republic P-47 Thunderbolt joined the aerial battlefield, Luftwaffe ace Johannes Mackie Steinhoff reportedly radioed to his squadron after an early encounter. "Look for the American fighter that's as big as a house. You can't possibly miss it." This dismissive attitude would prove to be a fatal miscalculation. The Republic P-47 Thunderbolt represented the heaviest single-engine fighter of World War II, weighing in at over 10,000 pounds fully loaded, nearly twice the weight of the nimble Messerschmitt Bf 109 it would face in combat. American pilots climbing into the cockpit for the first time often shared the German skepticism, dubbing it the Juggernaut, T-Bolt, or less affectionately, the flying bathtub due to its barrel-shaped fuselage. The journey of this massive fighter from concept to combat embodied the industrial might and engineering ingenuity that would ultimately overwhelm the Axis powers. Republic aviation, under the leadership of Alexander Kartveli, faced daunting challenges in creating what would become the largest single-engine fighter in history. The original 1940 design proposal called for a lightweight interceptor, but as war requirements shifted, so did the P-47's specifications. Each iteration grew larger to accommodate more firepower, armor, and range. When the XP-47B prototype first flew on May 6, 1941, it represented a radical departure from conventional fighter design philosophy. While European designers like Willy Messerschmitt and Reginald Mitchell favored sleek, liquid-cooled inline engines for their fighters, Republic went in the opposite direction, selecting the massive 18-cylinder Pratt & Whitney R2800 double Wasp radial engine. This 200 horsepower behemoth, covered by the Thunderbolt's distinctive elliptical cowling, gave the aircraft its unmistakable profile. The engineering complexity behind the P-47's performance was remarkable. The double Wasp engine drove a four-bladed propeller spanning over 12 feet, but perhaps the most innovative feature lay hidden from view. The P-47 employed a complex supercharging system with the turbocharger located behind the cockpit. Exhaust gases traveled through ducts running along the fuselage belly to the turbine, with compressed air returned through intercoolers to the engine, an arrangement that would prove crucial for high-altitude performance where many German fighters struggled to operate effectively. By April 1943, the first operational Thunderbolts reached the 8th Air Force in England as part of the 56th Fighter Group. Their arrival couldn't have come at a more critical juncture. The daylight strategic bombing campaign against Nazi Germany was faltering under devastating losses, with B-17 and B-24 bombers desperately needing fighter escorts capable of matching their range. However, the Thunderbolt's combat debut proved less than stellar. The 4th Fighter Group, veterans of RAF service in Eagle's squadrons, received their P-47s with skepticism, having transitioned from the more agile Spitfires. Pilot Francis Gabi Gabreski later recalled, "My first impression was that I would never be able to coax this massive fighter off the ground. Everything about it seemed outsized. The canopy, the wings, even the control stick felt like it belonged on a bomber." Early missions revealed troubling limitations. The P-47's rate of climb lagged behind its German adversaries, and fuel consumption rates restricted escort ranges to barely 175 miles, insufficient to protect bombers deep into German territory. More concerning was the aircraft's high-altitude handling. Above 25,000 feet, where the bomber formations typically operated, the controls became increasingly stiff, requiring significant physical strength to maneuver effectively. These issues, combined with its distinctive size, made the Thunderbolt an easy target for Luftwaffe intelligence assessment. German pilots were specifically briefed on exploiting the P-47's weaknesses. Luftwaffe tacticians advised their pilots to climb above the American formations, then make diving attacks, while avoiding extended turning engagements with the heavy fighter. The German fighter command initially classified the P-47 as a minimal threat, especially compared to the P-38 Lightning and British Spitfire. The German confidence seemed justified in those early months. Between April and August 1943, P-47 units struggled to establish aerial dominance. Mechanical issues compounded their challenges. The complex turbocharger system proved vulnerable to combat damage, and the initial high-altitude gun freezing problems required field modifications. The 50-caliber Browning machine guns, while devastatingly effective when they worked, frequently jammed in the freezing temperatures above 25 feet. Yet behind these teething problems, the P-47 revealed glimpses of the formidable weapon it would become. Hubert "Hub" Zemke, commanding officer of the 56th Fighter Group, recognized the Thunderbolt's potential early on. Rather than trying to dogfight with more agile German fighters, Zemke developed tactics that maximized the P-47's advantages: phenomenal diving speed, robust construction, and concentrated firepower from its 8 50-caliber machine guns. A turning point came during a bomber escort mission on July 30, 1943. The 4th Fighter Group's P-47s engaged a formation of Focke-Wulf FW-190s attacking B-17s near Kassel. Though outnumbered, the American pilots used their aircraft's superior high-speed diving ability to slash through the German formation. When Lieutenant Robert S. Johnson returned to base, maintenance crews counted more than 200 bullet and cannon shell holes in his Thunderbolt. Yet it had brought him home safely. The aircraft's durability began earning grudging respect from its pilots. By fall 1943, Luftwaffe pilots were encountering P-47s with increasing frequency, and their initial dismissal was giving way to a more cautious approach. A captured intelligence report from October 1943 noted, "The American P-47 exhibits unexpected survivability. Multiple confirmed hits with 20mm cannon failed to bring down several of these aircraft. Pilots are advised to concentrate fire on the cockpit area or engine, rather than dispersing shots across the airframe." The Thunderbolt's reputation was transforming, but slowly. American commanders recognized the need for modifications to address its limitations. Fuel capacity remained the most pressing concern, as the heavy fighter simply couldn't stay with the bombers all the way to distant targets like Berlin. The introduction of external fuel tanks would eventually solve this problem, but technical challenges with tank design and fuel system pressurization delayed their effective deployment. As 1943 drew to a close, the full potential of the P-47 Thunderbolt remained unrealized. The Luftwaffe, though more cautious in engaging the massive fighter, still viewed it primarily as an intermediate threat, dangerous in certain situations, but manageable through proper tactics. What they couldn't yet appreciate was how Republic Aviation and the Army Air Forces were rapidly addressing the Thunderbolt's weaknesses while developing tactics that would maximize its considerable strengths. The stage was set for a transformation that would turn this seemingly ungainly fighter into one of the most effective combat aircraft of the war. The flying bathtub that had initially drawn skepticism and mockery was about to demonstrate its lethal potential. For the Luftwaffe, the laughter would soon stop. In the early months of 1943, as P-47 Thunderbolts began arriving in the European theater in greater numbers, both American commanders and pilots were still discovering exactly what role this massive fighter would play in the air war against Germany. Initial combat sorties revealed significant limitations that threatened to relegate the Thunderbolt to secondary status among Allied fighters. The P-47's primary mission, escorting bombers deep into German territory, exposed its greatest weakness. At high altitudes above 25 feet, where B-17s and B-24s conducted their strategic bombing campaigns, Thunderbolt pilots found their machines hampered by range limitations. The massive R-2800 engine, while providing tremendous power, consumed fuel at an alarming rate. Early models could barely reach Berlin before needing to turn back, leaving bombers vulnerable during the most critical portions of their missions. "We'd watch our fuel gauges drop faster than we thought possible," recalled one 78th Fighter Group pilot. "The worst feeling was having to announce you were bingo fuel and turn back for England, knowing those bomber boys were continuing on without you." This handicap became painfully clear during missions like the August 17, 1943 Schweinfurt-Regensburg raid, where B-17s suffered catastrophic losses after their P-47 escorts had to turn back at the German border. The 56th Fighter Group's commander, Colonel Hubert Zemke, recognized that success would require reimagining how the Thunderbolt fought. The solution emerged through what pilots called dive and zoom tactics. Unlike the Spitfire or Bf-109, which excelled in tight turning engagements, the Thunderbolt's weight made it sluggish in horizontal maneuvers. However, that same mass, combined with the powerful engine, gave the P-47 exceptional diving acceleration and energy retention in vertical maneuvers. "We learned to use altitude as our ally," explained Major Robert Johnson, who would become one of the top P-47 aces. "When we spotted enemy aircraft below, we'd dive at them with tremendous speed, make a firing pass, then zoom, climb back to safety using our energy advantage. The Germans couldn't follow us up." This tactical evolution coincided with critical technical improvements. By early 1944, Republic Aviation had developed the paddle blade propeller, a wider chord design that dramatically improved the P-47's rate of climb and acceleration. The difference was immediate and significant, improving climb rate by nearly 30%. Coupled with water injection systems that allowed for brief periods of emergency power, the Thunderbolt was becoming a more formidable adversary. Luftwaffe pilots, who had initially dismissed the bulky American fighter as an easy target, began reporting troubling encounters. The P-47's remarkable durability often came as a shocking surprise. Attacking from behind, German pilots would score hits on Thunderbolts only to watch them continue flying, the air-cooled radial engine and armored cockpit absorbing punishment that would have downed most other fighters. One Luftwaffe pilot's combat report captured this growing frustration. "I fired directly into the Americans' engine from close range. Coolant or oil began streaming back, but the aircraft continued flying and diving away at high speed. My ammunition was exhausted before I could press the attack further." This durability translated to growing confidence among American pilots. Lieutenant Harold Comstock of the 56th Fighter Group survived an encounter that became legendary within the unit. After tangling with FW-190s near Kiel, Comstock's Thunderbolt absorbed over 200 cannon and machine gun hits, lost a significant portion of its tail assembly, and had one landing gear shot away. Yet he managed to nurse the battered fighter back across the North Sea to England, where he crash-landed without injury. Stories like Comstock's spread quickly through the fighter groups, cementing the P-47's reputation as a pilot's savior. The psychological advantage this gave American airmen was incalculable. Knowing your aircraft could absorb punishment and still bring you home changed how aggressively pilots were willing to engage the enemy. The 56th Fighter Group, under Colonel Zemke's leadership, became particularly effective with the Thunderbolt. Adapting to the aircraft's strengths, the group developed formation tactics that maximized the P-47's high-altitude performance and diving power. By spring 1944, the 56th had produced several aces and established itself as one of the premier fighter units in the European theater. The Thunderbolt's kill ratio steadily improved as pilots mastered its unique characteristics. where early engagements had often ended indecisively. By mid-1944, experienced P-47 pilots were claiming multiple victories per mission. Major David Schilling of the 56th described the evolution. "We stopped trying to turn with the 109s and 190s. Instead, we'd come in fast from above, make one devastating pass with all 8-50s firing, then climb away before they could react. Then we'd set up for another pass. It was like a shooting gallery. The installation of external fuel tanks, first 75-gallon, then 108-gallon, and eventually 150-gallon models, gradually solved the range problem that had initially hampered escort operations. By D-Day, Thunderbolts could accompany bombers much deeper into German territory, though the arrival of the longer-ranged P-51 Mustang would eventually shift the P-47's primary mission. Luftwaffe pilots began developing counter-tactics specifically for engaging Thunderbolts, avoiding the deadly diving attacks and attempting to lure P-47s into turning fights where the German fighters held the advantage. However, experienced Thunderbolt pilots refused to be baited, maintaining disciplined energy tactics that played to their aircraft's strengths. As Allied forces prepared for the invasion of Normandy, the Thunderbolt was finding its true calling. The combination of 8 50-caliber machine guns, remarkable structural strength, and impressive load-carrying capability made it ideal for a role that would soon become its signature mission, ground attack. Thunderbolt groups began practicing low-level strafing and bombing, learning to use their heavy fighters as precision ground attack platforms. The P-47's ability to dive steeply, deliver its ordnance accurately, and absorb ground fire made it uniquely suited for this dangerous work. The same thick armor and radial engine that protected pilots in air-to-air combat proved equally valuable against flak and small arms fire from below. By late spring 1944, as Allied forces prepared for the cross-channel invasion, the transformation of the Thunderbolt's reputation was well underway. From an overweight disappointment to a respected and feared combat aircraft, the P-47 had evolved through a combination of technical improvements, tactical innovation, and pilot experience. The Luftwaffe, which had once mockingly referred to the P-47 as the Juggernaut for its ungainly appearance, now approached engagements with the American fighter with growing caution. German pilot Hans Goetz, captured in May 1944, told interrogators, "We were ordered to avoid the Thunderbolts when possible. Their diving speed made them difficult to escape once they had the altitude advantage, and their firepower was devastating if they caught you." As the Allies prepared to storm the beaches of Normandy, the Thunderbolt stood ready for what would become its finest hour: the systematic destruction of German ground forces and the final crushing of the Luftwaffe over its home territory. The aircraft that had once been laughed at was about to have the last laugh. By early 1944, the Thunderbolt was finding its true identity on the European battlefield. What began as a high-altitude interceptor designed to escort bombers deep into enemy territory was evolving into something far more devastating: a ground attack specialist that would eventually become the bane of German ground forces across Western Europe. The P-47's transformation was partly born of necessity. With P-51 Mustangs increasingly handling high-altitude escort duties, Thunderbolt groups began to specialize in what the aircraft did extraordinarily well: deliver punishing firepower at low to medium altitudes. Republic Aviation had inadvertently created the perfect ground attack platform: rugged, powerful, and capable of absorbing punishment that would destroy most other fighters. "We started calling them Jugs, not just because of their jug-like shape, but because they were juggernauts," recalled Lieutenant Colonel Hubert Zemke of the 56th Fighter Group. "Once you pointed that nose down toward the ground, with those 850 calibers blazing, nothing seemed to stop them." April 1944 marked a critical milestone when 9th Air Force Thunderbolts began regularly carrying bombs, typically 500-pound general-purpose bombs, under each wing. The already formidable fighter could now deliver 1,000 pounds of high explosives in addition to the ammunition for its machine guns. By summer, many P-47 variants were fitted with rails capable of carrying 4 5-inch M8 rockets, completing the aircraft's evolution into what pilots called a flying artillery piece. The D-Day invasion provided the Thunderbolt with its most historically significant arena. As Allied forces struggled to break out from the Normandy beachheads, P-47 groups flew hundreds of sorties attacking German reinforcements, supply lines, and armor. Thunderbolt pilots became experts at hunting along roads and railway lines, striking anything that moved toward the front. "We'd go hunting in flights of 4, explained Captain James Goodson of the 4th Fighter Group. Trucks, trains, staff cars, anything on the move was fair game. First pass with the bombs, then we'd come around with the 50s. We made it damn near impossible for the Germans to move in daylight." The typical Thunderbolt ground attack profile involved approaching at medium altitude, selecting a target, then diving at a 30-40-degree angle. Pilots would release bombs at around 2,000 feet, then continue the dive while firing their 50-caliber machine guns before pulling up at treetop level. Against armored vehicles, the P-47 pilots developed specific techniques, approaching from the rear or side where armor was thinnest, then concentrating fire on engine compartments and tracks. The psychological impact on German ground forces was devastating. Wehrmacht veterans later described the Thunderbolt as der Schrecken, the terror. Unlike the faster but more lightly armed fighters, the P-47's ground attacks were particularly brutal. Its 850 caliber Browning machine guns could fire 850 rounds per minute each, a total of 6 800 rounds per minute, creating a devastating cone of fire that could tear apart anything not protected by heavy armor. In July 1944, during the critical days of Operation Cobra, the Allied breakout from Normandy, Thunderbolts played a decisive role. In the 3-day operation, over 550 P-47 sorties were flown against German defensive positions. The 9th Air Force alone claimed 257 tanks and armored vehicles destroyed during this period. While these numbers, like most battlefield claims, were likely optimistic, the operational impact was undeniable. German armor could no longer maneuver effectively in daylight. Major General Elwood Pete Quesada, commander of NIEC's Tactical Air Command, pioneered the use of forward air controllers and equipped P-47s with VHF radio sets tuned to ground frequencies, allowing direct communication with frontline units. This innovation permitted rapid response to emerging threats and opportunities. A tank column, spotted by reconnaissance, could have P-47s overhead within minutes rather than hours. The Germans had to completely rethink their tactics, explained Dr. Richard Hallion, Air Force historian. Movement schedules shifted to night operations, supply convoys were broken into smaller units. Entire armor units had to travel with substantially increased anti-aircraft protection, tying up valuable resources. By August 1944, the cumulative effect on German logistics was crippling. Field Marshal Günther von Kluge reported to Hitler that the enemy's complete command of the air paralyzes all movement by day and makes it impossible to bring up reserves in time. This logistical strangulation directly contributed to the collapse of German forces in the Falaise Pocket, where Allied forces encircled and destroyed significant elements of 2 German armies. The Luftwaffe, already stretched thin across multiple fronts, found itself increasingly tasked with defending against these devastating ground attacks. This forced them to shift valuable fighter assets away from bomber interception duties to low-altitude patrols, creating a tactical dilemma they couldn't resolve with their limited resources. German pilots who had once dismissed the Thunderbolt now developed a healthy respect for it. Luftwaffe records reveal a growing concern about engaging P-47s in ground attack configurations. The aircraft's durability meant that even a successful interception didn't guarantee a kill. Oberleutnant Kurt Schulze of JG-3 noted in his combat diary, "The Thunderbolt required multiple cannon hits to bring down. Even with engine damage, they could glide for miles." Statistical analysis of combat records shows that by mid-1944, P-47 pilot survival rates after taking enemy fire were substantially higher than other fighters. The massive R-2800 engine could absorb considerable damage. The cockpit featured armor plating that could stop 20mm cannon shells, and the aircraft systems had extensive redundancy. Cooling lines, control cables, and hydraulics were duplicated or protected, meaning that damage that would cripple other fighters often resulted in merely a difficult but survivable return flight for Thunderbolt pilots. This survivability translated directly into operational effectiveness. A P-47 squadron could sustain operations with fewer replacement aircraft and experienced lower pilot loss rates than equivalent units flying other types. The 56th Fighter Group, which flew P-47s exclusively throughout the war, produced 39 aces while maintaining one of the highest operational readiness rates of any fighter group. By September 1944, the tactical adaptation reached its zenith as Thunderbolt groups began operating from forward airfields in liberated France. Operating from these advanced bases dramatically increased loiter time over target areas, allowing for more thorough interdiction of German movements. P-47 pilots became intimately familiar with their hunting grounds, developing detailed knowledge of terrain features, German defensive positions, and effective attack routes. The Germans responded with increasingly dense anti-aircraft defenses. Mobile flak units were attached to virtually all road movements, and camouflage became more sophisticated. Field-expedient air raid shelters appeared alongside roads and railways, allowing personnel to take cover when Thunderbolts appeared. German records indicate that specialized Jabo-Warte fighter bomber watchers were positioned to provide early warning of approaching aircraft. German infantry developed a healthy fear of the P-47, particularly after encountering its devastating rocket attacks. The M8 rockets, while not particularly accurate, created enormous psychological impact. A full salvo from a 4-ship flight of Thunderbolts could saturate an area the size of a football field, making them particularly effective against troop concentrations, vehicle parks, and supply dumps. As the Allied armies pushed toward Germany's western borders, the Thunderbolt found new hunting grounds. The Hürtgen Forest and Ardennes campaigns saw P-47s operating in increasingly challenging weather, often flying under low cloud ceilings to strike at German forces. During the Battle of the Bulge in December 1944, Thunderbolts flew critical close air support missions despite marginal weather, helping to blunt the German offensive. Major Glenn Eagleston of the 353rd Fighter Group recalled, "We'd take off in weather no sane person would fly in, find a hole in the clouds, and drop down to the deck. Sometimes you'd be flying at 100 feet, looking for targets. But when we found them, a column of German armor or trucks, the effect was devastating." The statistical impact of the Thunderbolt's ground attack campaign is telling. By the end of 1944, P-47 groups had claimed over 6 00 locomotives, 68 Zolzan trucks, and 9 Zolzan armored vehicles. While these figures certainly include overcounting, the operational impact was clear. German units facing Allied advances consistently reported critical shortages of fuel, ammunition, and replacements due to interdiction of their supply lines. The systematic destruction of German transportation infrastructure by Thunderbolts and other fighter bombers created a ripple effect through the entire German war effort. Rail marshalling yards, bridges and supply depots attacked by P-47s meant that critical materials never reached factories, while manufactured goods and weapons never reached frontline units. This cascading logistical collapse accelerated as winter approached. As 1944 drew to a close, the once dismissed flying bathtub had proven itself to be one of the most effective weapons in the Allied arsenal. The P-47 Thunderbolt had evolved from an unloved heavyweight to a devastating ground attack specialist that was systematically dismantling the German ability to wage war. The stage was set for the final campaigns that would carry the Thunderbolt over Germany itself, where it would continue its relentless assault on what remained of Hitler's once formidable war machine. In the final months of the war, the Thunderbolt became the physical embodiment of American air power over the skies of Europe. As Allied forces pushed deeper into Germany in early 1945, the P-47 was there in overwhelming numbers, hunting the remaining Luftwaffe aircraft and devastating ground targets with methodical precision. The last great challenge for the Thunderbolt pilots came during the Battle of the Bulge in December 1944, when poor weather initially grounded Allied air power. When the skies finally cleared on December 23rd, P-47 groups surged forward, flying multiple sorties daily to break up German armor concentrations and supply lines. The 406th Fighter Group alone claimed 117 German vehicles destroyed in a single day of operations. This decisive air intervention helped halt the German offensive and demonstrated how the aircraft had evolved from a pure fighter into a devastating battlefield presence. The ultimate expressions of the P-47's design came in the final war years with the introduction of the P-47M and P-47N variants. The M model was specifically engineered to counter the emerging threat of German jet aircraft, particularly the Me-262. Fitted with an uprated R2800-57 engine producing over 800 horsepower, it could reach speeds approaching 475 mph at altitude. Only 130 were produced and deployed to the 56th Fighter Group in England, where they flew specialized interceptor missions against V-1 flying bombs and jet aircraft. The P-47N represented the final evolution, designed primarily for the Pacific theater, with its enormous 800-mile range thanks to wet-wing fuel tanks. With a wingspan stretched by 18 inches and strengthened to accommodate 2,000 pounds of additional fuel, the N model could escort B-29 super fortresses all the way to the Japanese mainland. Though arriving too late for significant European combat, the N model served extensively in the Pacific, where the Thunderbolt's ruggedness proved equally valuable against Japanese defenses. The engineering factors behind the P-47's remarkable survivability became increasingly apparent as the war progressed. The massive airframe, with its empty weight exceeding 10,000 pounds, provided structural integrity that smaller fighters simply couldn't match. The air-cooled R2800 radial engine could absorb tremendous damage while continuing to function, unlike liquid-cooled engines that could be disabled by a single bullet to the coolant system. Pilot protection was exceptional, with armor plating and self-sealing fuel tanks that could absorb multiple hits. A technical analysis of recovered P-47s revealed that approximately 7% of combat-damaged Thunderbolts were written off as total losses, compared to 6% for P-51 Mustangs. In simple terms, a P-47 hit in combat was 3 times more likely to return to base than its sleeker counterpart. Maintenance crews regularly documented Thunderbolts returning with hundreds of bullet holes, missing control surfaces, damaged cylinders, and even direct hits to the cockpit that pilots somehow survived. In the Pacific theater, the Thunderbolt's contributions have often been overshadowed by Navy carrier operations and the iconic status of the P-38 Lightning. Nevertheless, from New Guinea to Okinawa, Army Air Force's P-47 units played crucial roles in supporting ground operations. The 5th Air Force's 348th Fighter Group, commanded by Colonel Neil Kirby, became the highest-scoring P-47 unit in the Pacific, demonstrating the Thunderbolt's effectiveness against the maneuverable but lightly constructed Japanese fighters. The production numbers tell a story of American industrial might. 15 636 P-47 Thunderbolts were built between 1941 and 1945, with peak production reaching 100 aircraft per month. This massive output required not just Republic Aviation's main plant in Farmingdale, New York, but additional facilities in Evansville, Indiana. The Thunderbolt's $85 unit cost, higher than the P-51's $51, reflected its complex engineering and robust construction, but the investment paid dividends in combat effectiveness and pilot survival rates. Post-war assessments from surviving Luftwaffe pilots revealed a grudging respect for the aircraft they had once mocked. General Major Adolf Galland, who commanded German fighter forces, later acknowledged, "The P-47 was the most difficult American fighter to destroy. It could absorb incredible punishment and still bring its pilot home." Another German ace, Heinz Baer, noted, "When we saw Thunderbolts, we knew we were in for a difficult fight. If we damaged them, they often kept flying. If they damaged us, our aircraft usually did not survive." Statistics support these assessments. By war's end, P-47 pilots had claimed 752 enemy aircraft destroyed in air-to-air combat in the European theater alone, plus over 900 locomotives, 8600 motor vehicles, 6,000 armored vehicles, and 68 Unisollen horse-drawn vehicles. The 56th Fighter Group, which used the P-47 exclusively throughout the war, produced 39 aces and destroyed 627. 5 enemy aircraft in the air and 311 on the ground, more than any other 8th Air Force Fighter Group. In the broader context of the air war, the P-47 filled a unique niche that complemented the P-51 Mustang's long-range escort capabilities. While the Mustang eventually became the primary escort fighter, the Thunderbolt's ground attack prowess and durability made it irreplaceable in the tactical air war. This division of labor, with the P-51 protecting bombers and hunting fighters at altitude while the P-47 dominated the battlefield below, created a comprehensive Allied air strategy that the Luftwaffe simply could not counter. The Thunderbolt's legacy extended well beyond World War II. Many remained in service with the newly formed United States Air Force until the early 1950s, and even more served with allied nations, from Mexico to Brazil, Turkey to France, some continuing operational use into the 1960s. The aircraft's influence on fighter design principles, particularly regarding survivability, firepower, and multi-role capabilities, shaped military aviation for generations. From the drawing boards at Republic Aviation to the skies over Berlin, the P-47 Thunderbolt had completed a remarkable journey. The aircraft, initially dismissed by German intelligence as too heavy and unmaneuverable, had evolved into one of the most formidable weapons in the Allied arsenal. The flying bathtub had earned its place in aviation history not through elegant design or aesthetic appeal, but through raw power, devastating effectiveness, and an unmatched ability to bring its pilots home. In the words of Lieutenant Colonel Francis Gabreski, the top-scoring American ace in Europe, who claimed most of his 28 victories flying the P-47, "It was an honest aircraft that got you home. What more could any pilot ask for?"